Holding on to sunan and holding on to cultural norms, and particularly the ones that are moral, that have a moral, ethical rationale behind them. So the akhlaqi principles of Islam, the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially the ones that have anything to do with integrity, honesty, justice, fair treatment, telling the truth, not lying, that kind of thing. These things are extremely important because they are important to the preservation of Iman and the preservation of Islam. Why? Because one of the most important arguments in favor of the truth of Islam is the integrity of the Prophet ﷺ. Correct? It's the amana of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. It's the idea that the Prophet ﷺ never lied. The idea that the Prophet ﷺ was absolutely trustworthy. The idea that the Prophet ﷺ never lied about dunyawi matters. How could he lie about ukhrawi matters? How could he lie about Allah when he never lied about the dunya? Now, in order for the truth of Islam to survive in the human domain, in the divine domain it's the truth. In the human domain, for it to survive, the idea of complete trustworthiness has to be believable. Listen to this carefully and repeat this wherever you go. The idea of trustworthiness, of amana, right, of being trustworthy, of being upright, of being people who don't lie, of being people who do not engage in corruption, right, or people being who are fair-minded, will treat others with justice even if it goes against themselves, as the Quran speaks about, and so on. It is up to the Muslim Ummah to keep these values believable and real. The moment they become mythical is the moment the Prophet ﷺ becomes unbelievable. Do you understand? So the only way to preserve the Prophet ﷺ as true, and it being possible for somebody to be like that, is for that example, or at least remnants of that example, to exist in human behavior. If it doesn't remain, then it automatically becomes a myth. Because what are myths? Myths are things that cannot be confirmed, but people find it difficult to believe because they see no example of it today. Does that make sense? Right? So the idea, if I never see an example of one of the akhlaq of the Prophet ﷺ in another person, I'm naturally going to assume that it's some sort of miracle, some sort of myth, something that's unbelievable, right? And then the whole reason why I would believe it is because of blind faith. So the credibility almost of Islam is dependent upon the credibility of the Muslim Ummah. This is why I believe genuinely in the necessity of the commitment to a set of cultural norms that are timeless. Like we have to sociologically identify something about Islam that is cultural and eternal, right? There are a set of norms that run through all cultures, and to a certain extent it's there, but it's not spelt out well enough. But there are certain matters of akhlaq, matters of culture, matters of social refinement and social etiquette that have to become cultural for us, that no matter where, and they're part and parcel of the basic teachings of faith for us, that no matter where Muslims go, they practice these things. It doesn't matter whether a Muslim is a River Englishman or a Malay Muslim, or a Muslim in or an Aboriginal Muslim in Australia, or somebody in sub-Saharan Africa. It doesn't matter where they're from. These things are constants culturally. It doesn't matter how different they dress. It's really important. What's really interesting is that the shaitan is actually diverting us from all of this by making us obsess about things that aren't necessarily such norms. Does that make sense? So we're obsessing about trousers above the ankles, below the ankles, the length of the beard, the style of dress, how long the qameez has to be, whether the head should be covered, whether the head shouldn't be covered. For men, I'm talking about perhaps the style of hijab, whether the niqab, whether not the niqab. We're obsessing about these zahiri issues when there are metaphysical traits that are far more important, right? That are fundamental to the continuity of the authenticity of Islam. But nobody even cares about those things. Nobody's bothered. Okay? And it's really interesting how this works. All right? So so I did that Facebook post about smartphones and children, right? And young people. And what's fascinating was that most of the responses were positive, but some people wanted to say, oh, how dare you say it's haram? How can you say it's haram? Let's ignore that. But what I found really interesting was a few days later, I thought, you know what? Let's have a look at all these fatwa websites and see if any of the ulama are dealing with this issue. And amazingly, like nobody's dealing with it. Like one of the most dangerous things to young people, and nobody's said a word about, ulama particularly, have not said a word about how it needs to be avoided. Instead, guess what they're obsessing over? Guess what that very question produces in terms of results? Whether a woman has to appear in her niqab or not, if she takes a picture with her phone, whether it's permissible to look at a woman if her picture has been taken, whether these kind of things. Meaning you have a universal consensus across the globe between doctors and psychologists and everyone about how harmful something is to the morality and the human upbringing of a child, as well as the child's physical well-being. Okay? And we're distracted from it with matters of fiqh. Not that they're not important, but this is precisely what happens when you lose touch with what your core values are.